Hello. On behalf of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative and Building Markets, I would like to welcome you to this webinar marking World Micro, Small, and Medium-Sized Enterprises MSME Day. I'm Kari Diener, the Executive Director of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder collaboration spearheading a global effort to transform humanitarian response towards self-reliance and economic inclusion for refugees. In the face of significant global displacement and growing inequality, the narrative around refugees needs a shift, from viewing refugees merely as aid recipients to acknowledging their resilience and resourcefulness as entrepreneurs capable of enriching local economies and driving local economic growth. Our discussion today, focused on accelerating local economic development through refugee-led SMEs, will explore the unique challenges and opportunities encountered by refugee entrepreneurs, the potential role of refugee-led SMEs in revitalizing local economies, and how international donors, buyers, NGOs, and policymakers can support and leverage refugee entrepreneurship as an engine for local economic development. To set the stage for our conversation, I want to note that as we also mark World Refugee Day this month, war and conflict have now forced a staggering 110 million people to flee their homes. Most notably, those who escape across a border often don't return for 10 or even 20 years, sometimes much, much longer. Yet humanitarian aid is often erratic and inadequate and only focuses on immediate needs many times. As observed by the former UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, the current system leaves millions of refugees trapped in dependence on short-term aid that keeps them alive, but falls short of ensuring their safety, dignity, and ability to thrive and become self-reliant over the long term. There is a growing global recognition that refugees need and want opportunities to become self-reliant, which is rooted in economic inclusion. Often forgotten from this narrative is the important role that refugee entrepreneurs can play in their countries of first asylum. Refugees bring skills and value to the economies of their hosting countries, and with opportunities to thrive and grow their businesses, refugee-led SMEs can also create new jobs that are needed to absorb the growing global workforce. In fact, in emerging markets, I just learned that most formal jobs are created by SMEs. In fact, 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10. Wow. We also know that one of the fastest ways of lifting people out of poverty is by creating jobs. And so when small businesses have access to opportunity, they most certainly create jobs and inclusive growth, facilitating the self-reliance of individuals, of families, and of communities. This is a win for refugees, and importantly, it's also a win for the so many communities that generously host them. To introduce our panelists and to set the stage for our discussion, I would like to now introduce Dr. Radha Rajkotia, the CEO of Building Markets. Before joining Building Markets as CEO, Radha held the position of Chief Research and Policy Officer at Innovations for Poverty Action, and also previously served as the Senior Director of Economic Recovery and Development at the International Rescue Committee. She sits on several boards, including the Cash Learning Partnership and the Center for Economic Opportunity, and she is a Senior Policy Fellow at the Henry Lear Institute for Human Security at Tufts University. Radha also serves as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, where she teaches a course on refugees and economic opportunity. So over to you, Radha.
Great, thank you, Kari, and thanks everyone for joining. It's exciting to see so many familiar names in the participant list, and I hope you'll all participate in this conversation with us. I'm delighted to have the series of great panelists alongside me today, and I will introduce them in a moment. First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself and Building Markets. As Kari mentioned, I'm Radha Rajkotia, the CEO of Building Markets. And Elizabeth, can we have the slides, please? And Building Markets, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit focused on building inclusive economies for small enterprises, small businesses, so that everybody has the opportunity to rise. We do this by working directly with small businesses, providing them with capacity development services, and importantly, access to markets. what we're going to be talking about today are inclusive economies, and economies that can grow with the input of, with the positive contribution of refugee-led businesses, the buyers who might be involved in purchasing services from those small businesses, as well as government stakeholders. Now I'm going to go to introducing the panelists. So first of all, I'm very pleased to introduce Somar Nassar. So Somar Nassar serves as a business development coordinator focused on export promotion for Building Markets Turkey. Prior to this, he was focused on exports still as an export specialist with KX Consulting in Konya. He himself holds a master's degree in economics from Selçuk University in Turkey and a bachelor's degree in economics from Al-Baath University in Syria. Second of all, I'd like to introduce Jacqueline Sofia. Jackie is a co-founder and chief impact and strategy officer at Sitti, a certified women's business enterprise and an impact-driven lifestyle brand in Ontario, Canada. In her position, Jackie leads the company's stakeholder-driven approach to impact measurement, evaluation, reporting, and learning. We'll be thrilled to hear about some of the exciting partnerships that Jackie's team has been focused on with Sitti. And last but not least, I want to introduce Yara Assad, who's a private sector development specialist at the World Bank. Yara has been working for the past 5 years on mobilizing the private sector in support of economic inclusivity of forcibly displaced people, primarily through a platform at the World Bank called the World Bank's Private Sector for Refugees Project, PS4R. So in this, they've been focused on including refugees and internally displaced people from Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, and are looking to expand into other countries. Right, so as we move on, I'd love to welcome you to participate. For all the participants, please do share questions in the chat. In terms of format, we'll be hearing from each of our panelists initially. So I'll start with Jackie, and then we'll hear from Somar and Yara to give some brief remarks on just their roles and their experience from the various organizations in which they sit. And then we'll be opening into some more interactive question and answer. Thanks. Jackie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Radha. Like Radha mentioned, my name is Jacqueline Sofia. I'm from the US. I'll just share a little bit about Sitti with you. At Sitti, we are working with communities mostly in Jordan, but also in other countries throughout the region. Sitti is a female-founded, refugee-led and refugee-focused social enterprise. We create a bridge between refugee-led community-based organizations and global economy, as you can see here, including major corporate and luxury brands. And we do this primarily through goal alignment with corporate brand partnerships. So if you've shopped at any Los A10 store, for instance, in the Gulf region this past Ramadan season, you may have seen our handmade products on shelves, accompanied by the faces and stories of our refugee community members we work with in Jordan. This is just one example of what we do. And our overall mission is really to work alongside the refugee and displaced communities to achieve self-reliance through economic inclusivity.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Okay, let's move to Somar. Please hand it over to you.
Thank you, Radha. Hello, everyone. My name is Somar Nassar. I am a business development coordinator at Building Markets Turkey. I am mainly specialized in providing export and matchmaking services to the refugee-led SMEs, as we help them to access new markets and boost their export sales by connecting them with the foreign buyers and providing consultancy regarding all international topics and operations. I am so glad to be with you here in this webinar to share my observations and thoughts about refugee-led SMEs. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Yara, last but not least.
Thank you, Radha, and thanks for having me on this panel today. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak more about the potential of refugee SMEs and FDPs in general. So my name is Yara Assad. I'm a project lead under the Private Sector for Refugees, PS4R, which is a World Bank initiative that was actually launched in 2018 with a pilot in Jordan. Since then, PS4R has really expanded towards from Jordan to Lebanon, Iraq, Djibouti, Yemen, and recently we've published a diagnostics of Poland, looking at the role of the private sector in supporting Ukrainian refugees, be it as entrepreneurs I was looking at the technical stuff. So as entrepreneurs or for employment purposes. But what is PS4R? When the World Bank looked at this initiative in 2018, the idea was like, how can the World Bank play a role in responding to the refugee crisis? At the time was mostly the Syrian crisis. And since then, we've been seeing more and more crises happening and more refugees. As Radha mentioned, like in the past 2 months at least, the number of refugees has increased, especially looking at what's happening in Sudan now. So the idea was to shift the paradigm from a humanitarian perspective towards developmental, specifically what could be done on an economic inclusivity element. So what could be the role of the private sector and financial sectors in supporting the inclusivity of refugees? So what is this PS4R and what do we do? We work at 2 levels, a global level and a country level. On the global level, we call it really more of our research and development. We partner with global players everywhere who are interested in inclusivity of refugees, either by through investing in them, employing them, supporting them, and including them through their supply chains. We exchange knowledge about what has worked for us in Kenya, but has not worked in Jordan, or has worked in Jordan, but has not worked in Turkey, and so on. But that's so what we came in together and we did was to create first a guideline for the private sector, which is the Charter of Good Practice. And the idea of the Charter of Good Practice was more of guidelines for the private sector all over the world to look at what can you do to employ refugees or to invest in refugees, to produce goods and services that benefit refugees, or to support them within your supply chain as SMEs. And from that, we started looking at the frameworks and the tools that could be deployed on a country level. On country levels, we deploy our work through 4 main elements. So one is the main goal is the inclusive entrepreneurship. How could we be more inclusive of refugee businesses? Or then we expanded after Jordan from saying only refugee businesses to be more inclusive of internally displaced people, especially when we looked at Yemen and Iraq. As we expanded, we realized that the numbers of internally displaced is much bigger than the number of refugees. And these communities do need our support. It's different in some cases than it is from refugees, but it's still very, very crucial. And they play the same role in their economic development, in the local development of the economy. So with the inclusivity of entrepreneurship, we look at also how do we not only support the IDP and FDP communities, but also how do we support the host community. So in many cases, we walk in many countries, if they're anti-refugee, if they have an anti-refugee agenda, they'll be like, no, we have enough on our plate. Refugee hosting countries are normally more poor. They have a lot of constraints, a lot of barriers to entry, etc. And so we say around 80 to 70% of our beneficiaries, our target audience, is actually the host community. And more we grow the host community, then we go into 20 and 30% that we could focus on into inclusivity of FDP communities. The second part we do is we understand that all businesses, especially refugee and FDP SMEs, they do need our business development services. They do need B2B matchmaking in order to be able to access either finance and investment or to access markets. So we also provide that. We work with financial institutions to try and provide financial access to finance to those SMEs. Again, from the host community and the FDP community, we see them very much working together. And the last thing that really matters to us is that institutional development and policy work on the ground is the most important in order to sustain the work once our project is ending. And thus in the beginning, once we enter any country, we identify local intermediaries as local institutions that we could anchor the work with them, and we work hand in hand with them to support those SMEs. The last thing I would say is that PS4R now is at a phase where we have developed a training. The training is open for partners from the World Bank, but as well as partners outside the World Bank who would be interested in understanding more the potential of refugee businesses, but also how could you incorporate this refugee lens into the work that you are doing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Yara. So I'll ask all the panelists to come on camera now. So what we'll be doing now is just having a little bit more of an open conversation with our panelists to be able to just unpack some of that framework that Yara has provided in terms of looking at this issue around inclusivity and local economic growth from the perspective of refugee-led businesses, the buyers and corporations that they may be engaging with, as well as that policy and political environment in which they're situated. So let's start at the level of the small business first and then build out from there. So Somar, I'd love to hear maybe if you can provide an example or two of what is the kind of profile of the refugee-led businesses that you're working with, and what's their appetite? You focus on exports. That's not usually an area of work that we hear about for refugee communities. So what is their appetite for the exports, and what are some of the supports that they need in being able to focus on that area of work?
Well, thank you, Radha. Actually, the profile of SMEs that we are working with them in Turkey are mainly the Syrian refugees who fled the country after the war in Syria after 2011, and millions of them have been settled in Turkey and started their new lives. The entrepreneurs have started their new businesses here in the country and try to make some cohesion and integration into the local economy of Turkey. So regarding the export side of their work, as we know, they are coming from a new cultural environment and background. This gives them new knowledge, let's say unique knowledge or skills that can help them connect with the international markets, especially in the MENA market, in the MENA region, as many of these Syrian entrepreneurs have very strong and good connections in this region. This helps them to use their own networks and the connections in these countries to penetrate these countries and contribute to the export of products and services from Turkey to this region, which had a very positive impact on the local economy of Turkey, benefiting from the network of these entrepreneurs.
Great, thank you so much. And Jackie, maybe if we can hear from you, it'd be great to hear you work primarily with women's collectives. Can you talk a little bit about the focus, just the profile of those collectives themselves, and maybe as you're engaging in some of those corporate partnerships, maybe share with us an example of, what's a positive partnership that you've seen work very well in terms of a model that we can think about for this discussion.
Yeah. So the profile of the women's collectives that we work with, and they actually aren't just women's collectives, that we do work with refugee-led CBOs in Jordan that our primary focus is, our goals are gender equality and access to equity in work. But I would say that the primary community we're working with within the refugee community are women. And then we're also working with persons with disabilities. So we're really trying to hit those communities that are kind of within the marginalized community of the refugee-led businesses. But outside of that, the profile really is that they have an element of refugee leadership, right? So for our first partner we worked with in Jordan, again, Sitti started very organically. We were really a small project amongst a few women who saw an opportunity for income generation. The women that we were working with in the beginning were mostly the sole or primary income earners for their families. Their husbands, due to the situation in Jordan for refugees, where there's a lot of limitations on work access, their husbands or their sons were either completely out of work, unable to find work, or were working as day laborers. Older male members of the family were experiencing a lot of chronic health issues, so they couldn't even work at all. So these women were really taking it upon themselves. And you see that a lot in the communities where we work, but there was obviously an element of refugee leadership there. Also a real connection to the traditions passed down. So Sitti in Arabic means my grandmother. And for us, there's a real importance and focus on heritage-inspired, tradition-inspired approaches to product development and design. And so when we have been kind of developing this model, again, very organically over the past 7 years, it really came to our attention in a very kind of a natural way that there are corporate brands out there who are really struggling to figure out a way to meet the sustainability demands of Gen Zers and the millennials out there who are now the biggest, they have the biggest purchasing power in terms of the market. And for us, a real turning point for us came last year when we were approached by L'Occitane Middle East. L'Occitane, for those who may not know, is a major luxury brand, global luxury brand started in France. They really focus on their main values are, preserving craftsmanship, gender equality, and sustainability in all their products. So the real, for us, it was a no-brainer. There's obvious goal alignment there. But then they had been struggling with really kind of, again, accessing that Gen Zer market. The goal was for the Ramadan 2023 campaign that they had coming up was to see an increase in Gen Zer participation in that campaign. So when they came to us, we really had a very kind of goal-aligned discussion, and then it kind of became a campaign that was, for us, we were very focused on keeping the narrative centered on the stories of the community that we work with. So for us, we don't see a lot of benefit or incentive to work with corporate brands unless their understanding of the incentive for them to help drive the storytelling of those communities. Because without that storytelling approach, or that refugee focused storytelling approach, you lose a lot of the frankly, a lot of the market that you're trying to, the audience you're trying to approach. Gen Zers, today we see roughly 78% of Gen Zers are dissatisfied with the way corporate brands are meeting their sustainability goals. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that corporate brands are very large monoliths who kind of can't access those smaller communities on the local level. For us at Sitti, we're able to do that. We developed our relationships by working directly with the communities on the ground. And so we created that bridge for them. And we're really looking forward to doing that in the future with other brands as well.
Terrific. That's a great example. I just want to stay here for a minute because you both touched on the strengths that you're drawing on from the refugee community. So Somar, you talked about the the networks, the language, the social and cultural norms of doing business that the Syrian community has, and that was a way to build on that there. Jackie, you've talked about the kind of passed down traditions, which is just a wonderful way of thinking about using those innate qualities that people have, and a way a lot of creative entrepreneurs get started, which is so great. What is the case making, Jackie? You've talked about the sort of the big brand case making that you needed to do. Somar, when you're working with more local or other buyers that aren't necessarily the huge brands, what's the kind of, do you need to do some case making in order for them to be able to work with refugees, or is it just the business proposal itself that speaks for itself? How does it work in terms of your engagement with buyers? Do you have to, is there much persuasion or convincing that's required, or is this done on purely the economics itself?
Well, actually, regarding the SMEs in Turkey, from my own experience, we don't need to talk a lot about the specialty of refugees and this kind of ideas. We just need to go through business needs the buyers have. So we convince them that these SMEs, they have the proper experience and the good quality, the competency that you need in every side of the product, regarding the quality, regarding the prices, and other than that, we also show our business directory as a verification platform for these SMEs, that these SMEs are legally registered in Turkey. They have all the legal requirement to do business with you, to export to other countries. They have the proper certifications for their products they are producing and developing. So these kinds of requirements and sites, they are the critical point for buyers to buy from these SMEs.
That's great. That's like a true exemplar of mainstreaming when the refugee label doesn't even need to feature. That's fantastic. Yara, from your perspective now, looking across these countries that you've been focused on through PS4R and hearing these examples, these are great examples in isolation as case studies. What are some of the gaps that you see in terms of taking initiatives like Building Markets Work and Sitti's work to scale?
Thank you, Radha. I wanted to pick up on Somar's point, actually. When the private sector look into supporting a refugee business, they're not looking at it from a humanitarian perspective. A business is a business. They want the legitimacy of this business, the credibility, the potential for it to grow. So yes, it is important, as Somar said, to look at this not as a humanitarian element, but how is this business being upgraded? What's the potential for it to grow and to become a sustainable, with good quality, good consistent volume, to be able to be part of a supply chain? In terms of scalability, when we look at the overall ecosystem for refugee entrepreneurship, there are some angles that are scalable from what we've seen. Like, for example, I'll give an example in regulatory ecosystem is scalable. There's always room to be more inclusive, and there's always room to adopt new policies and regulations that could provide the needed ecosystem for refugees. So, for example, in Djibouti has a very welcoming refugee law. The implementation of the law was a bit that it needed more support. With the help of PS4R in Djibouti, we were able to do a diagnostics of the implementation and look more at inclusivity in terms of health, property, education, social and other aspects. So room for scalability with regulations is doable. Scalability when it comes to access to finance is also doable. Credit finance, concessional finance, etc. You could provide that. Skills, you could also provide constant skills, and there are many players in that. Infrastructure is the same. I think where really the challenge is, and where it is hardest to scale, is when it comes to access to markets. And that's for multiple reasons. You can scale if you go online today. And an example of that is building markets. Building markets model as a marketplace online is a very scalable platform. If we get to see more transparency in terms of contracting, transparency in terms of procurement, if bigger businesses are willing to look at those on the platform who are profiled, who are investable, who could be part of a supply chain, but we're giving them the opportunity to be part of a supply chain. But also, even if not part of a supply chain on a bigger, with the larger multinationals, they're still part of a supply chain with other businesses around the world, be it diaspora businesses, or be it countries that have been within a network. But then that's a platform that's a model of a platform that could scale and could provide more access to markets. And we don't have many of that. But the real challenge for refugee entrepreneurs, as well as host community entrepreneurs, but in general today, is access to markets. And that's, I think, where the focus should be.
Wonderful. Thanks, Yara. Jackie, maybe coming back to you then, it would be great to hear in terms of the, we talked a little bit about just the incentives that different buyers or corporations may have. You've spoken very clearly about the consumer interests that would be at the heart of some of their decision making. Your background and focuses on impact and data and measurement. Can you talk a little bit just about what kinds of data you find particularly persuasive when you're making the case for buyers to be working with refugee-led businesses?
Yeah. So for us as Sitti, the data we've seen in terms of impact, simply with large corporate brand partnerships, is really, it comes down to access to consistent work and consistent income for these refugee communities. And that is evident in our most recent campaign, where when we partnered with Lossy 10 as a corporate brand, and for us, this was to date, this was our largest corporate brand partnership. There were a lot of demands on the team that they had never seen before in terms of volume and output. But it was very clear that, when you put these challenges in front of these communities, they immediately rise to the occasion. And for us, we saw the impact happen, whereas in a period that spanned over 3 months. So we did a comparative period, 3 months prior, and then during the 3 months of production, where we were full on production and manufacturing with two of our corporate brands. Two of our CBO partners, we saw an over 90% increase in income generation for women who were working with our CBO partners, and over 60% income generation increase for all refugees who were working with our corporate brand partners over the span of that period. And that really in and of itself was incredibly eye-opening. And, you saw a ripple effect across not just for the individuals who had access to employment, but we saw a ripple effect across their households. We saw a ripple effect across the CBO partner organizations themselves. We have documented cases of people paying down debts, making improvements on their houses. And we saw people purchasing life-saving medications for their families and for themselves. For the CBO partners, we saw them, first of all, they were able to recognize and realize their capacity to scale in terms of their capacity to increase their output and do it at a really high quality level. But, there was also generated income for these CBO organizations, because for some of our partners, we are their only, source of income outside of humanitarian aid. And I think this is really key to keep in mind, is that you are seeing so many locally led CBO community-based organizations these days having to shut down, having to let go of team members, or all of their team members are simply volunteers who are not getting paid a salary. These are community-led, refugee-led organizations that know their communities the best. And so when you see the fact that you have a rising amount of refugees globally, and it's not just increasing, it is exponentially increasing. And you have these community-based organizations that are already there and able to support their communities locally and want to do that work. They just don't have access to the resources, the capital resources that they need to do that and to grow their economies locally. If we can have that influx of capital going towards these locally led organizations, you're going to see an economic growth in the communities there that takes that burden off of the host countries. And I mean, we've seen it time and again with our own partners. If we were, as a bigger company, if we were a much bigger company, I can guarantee like the impact you would see would be monumental. But I think it's so critical that these corporate brands start to notice the benefit for them from a simple revenue standpoint, but also from a global level, from the fact that, for instance, okay, you could have a serious impact on the host countries that you are part of. If you are a corporate brand that's a major brand in Jordan, for instance, or you're headquartered in somewhere within the GCC region, there is an advantage economically for you to start working with these refugee organizations. You are contributing to host countries being able to have their own economies grow and expand, and take that burden off of them from a humanitarian aid standpoint.
Great, terrific. Thanks, Jackie. Somar, can you share a little bit of the data that you have on just how the exports focused work has been working in Turkey? Can you describe, what is some of the success that you've seen there?
Well, actually, as building markets, let me talk about that. We have helped the SMEs in about 3 years or 4 years, over 4 years of our activity in Turkey. We have helped the SMEs to export products and make contracts with a total amount of about $6 to $7 million in total. We help them to reach this amount of contracts by connecting them directly to foreign buyers, to people who are seeking products from Turkey, and by the training and mentoring services that we are providing to them to support their business skills and how to deal properly with the foreign buyers and how to manage the operations of foreign trade and export correctly to reach and penetrate these international markets. We can say that some of these companies have developed unique products, and they have made some adjustment for the countries and markets they are targeting. For example, one of our beneficiaries is a manufacturing of packaging and packing systems. He's a very brilliant engineer who left Syria during the war and worked in the local companies in Turkey as production manager. Then he started his own business and created very developed ideas to improve the technology of these packing solutions, which made it easy for him to penetrate and reach to more than 15 countries in very short time. And the matchmaking and mentoring services of building markets has also helped him to access to several countries.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's a great example. I see some questions coming in, so I want to turn to those shortly. But one question is just on the issues you've talked about, the individual business leaders, and you've talked about the community-based organization leaders, Jackie. Can you talk just for a second about, and really just a minute each maybe, on how your focus on refugee-led businesses, how does that relate to issues around cohesion, social cohesion, tension in the local community? What are your experiences of seeing how, so Somar, the Syrian businesses versus or engaging with Turkish businesses, or are they quite separate? And Jackie, it'd be great to hear the same from your experiences in Jordan and elsewhere. Sorry, Somar, do you want to start? And then Jackie, we'll hand to you.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay, Jackie, go ahead. Do you want to go?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so when we started out, we were working solely with one community of refugees in Jordan, which was the Palestinian refugee community in Jadash camp. They are specifically, well, over 90% of them are considered ex-Gazan. So this is a very unique community because in Jordan, you have a lot of different refugee communities coming from throughout the region. Jordan is one of the largest hosts of refugees regionally. And they are also, you know, if you just to kind of give a little bit of statistics here in terms of numbers, consider the fact that over 40%, and actually now with the recent UNHCR report coming out, it's more than 40% of refugees globally are hosted by the 1% poorest and like lowest income countries. So, you know, just consider that number there for a second. But for us, when we started working with the ex-Gazan community in Jadash camp, they have a very uniquely difficult situation in Jordan compared to other Palestinian refugees who were who found asylum there after 1948. This community of refugees came after 1967. And I won't give an in-depth history lesson here, but if you Google, you know, the 1967 war, you know, you'll understand that it was a really contentious situation already where you had a lot of these Palestinians originating from in and around Gaza coming to Jordan, and not really, there was no structure in place to provide support for them for the most part. And even today, they are considered stateless, as opposed to a lot of Palestinians who came after 1948. They were granted citizenship in Jordan. This was not the case with ex-Gazans. And there is no way for them to go back. So they are in a very precarious place. And so for us, we were already aware of the situation. There's obviously a lot of tension in this case with, you know, between, you know, some Jordanian communities and the ex-Gazan community there. But, you know, Jordan also is, as mentioned, you know, they're struggling just to support the refugees that come in. At the end of the day, they have an open door. And so there's a lot of, there's a lot of, you know, trying to do what they can with what they have. So for us, there was a bit of a dance, right? And knowing that, okay, we are trying to bring these products to market from a community that is particularly marginalized in Jordan. But also knowing that there are a lot of people within the Jordanian community who are really understanding of the fact that, okay, provide access to employment for these communities, for these people, and you will see a lifting of the burden on the country's humanitarian aid and their resources. And so, you know, the story really played a huge role there. I think at the end of the day, you know, and I tend to harp on this quite a bit, but there is a human element you really have to tap into. And the fact is that these are women and men just like you and me, and it could easily be your family that's in this situation. And I think we did a really, not to toot our own horn, but we did a really concerted effort and a good job of focusing on the human stories of the people we work with, because they are very close. They are very close to us as friends, not just as colleagues. So I think that made a huge difference in that engagement. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's okay. Thanks, Jackie. Somar, how about you? Any comments on just how the Syrian business community works with the Turkish community? Do they work in parallel? Do they integrate? What do you see from your perspective?
Sure. Actually, regarding the Syrian entrepreneurs in Turkey, they are trying and they are doing their best to integrate properly in the local economy and work together with the Turkish enterprises as well. Of course, there is some kind of parallel economy in this inside this economy because, for example, the community of refugees, they have some their own requirement, their own products that they are using, and these products are not consumed by the local community. So this make some kind of parallel economy inside the whole economy. But on the other side, we have observed many partnerships and many mutual work between the refugee entrepreneurs and the Turkish entrepreneurs regarding the technology sector, the manufacturing sector. Many of our beneficiaries, they have partners in their businesses from the local community. I think this is a very crucial role for the refugee entrepreneurship to enhance and to support the social cohesion of refugees in the host community. Because these businesses, when they are providing employment and job creation to the local community, this is giving the opportunity to the other refugees to contribute very positively to the social fabric, let's say, of the host community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yara, okay, we're going to move to questions from all the participants now. So please note you have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So please do include questions there. We've seen a number of questions, and Sasha, I saw you put a question in the chat, so I will look at that one too. Yara, we've had a number of questions around financial access to finance for refugee-led businesses. So can you talk, so two questions that have come in. One, can you talk a little bit about where does startup capital, where does access to finance fit in the framework, and how can we support and inspire, I like the use of the word inspire, financial institutions to offer flexible credit to refugee-led SMEs, and try and address some of the fears and risks that are perceived?
Sure. So with startups, where they come in, it depends. I mean, like, for example, I'll give an example of Jordan. Normally, when we go into a market, we try to look at or we used to like to prefer looking at companies that are export ready or exporting, because at the time we used to believe that the more export they could have, or the more linkages they could bring, the more jobs they could create on the ground. But over time, again, the learnings from Jordan and other countries have showed us that that's one element of the framework that we use. The other element is actually local linkages. And with the local linkages, there's a huge need for the startups and the micro businesses and the smaller ones who could become part of the value chain for those medium or exporting or export ready ones. So with the startups in specific, we've tested that in Jordan by working with accelerators and incubators. So I'll give one which is like in agribusiness, Asad. With Asad, it's an incubator that we tested with them, working with 16 startups. We tried to have as many of those to be refugee owned, noting again, we do have a formula where we bring in the host community and refugees. The idea here was that this is a sector, technology in general, until then was not open, for example, for refugees. And this is an issue that we have policy-wise in many countries. There are specific sectors that are very employment attractive for the host communities, that governments tend to close them down on refugees or migrants and etc. to try to protect those sectors. In Jordan at the time, the technology sector was one of those, and even like any agri-tech businesses. So we tried to bring in those who were in partnership between Syrians and refugees and the Jordanians, speaking of social cohesion and bringing businesses together. Through that, we gave them all the program. We provided capacity building. We worked with them with the intermediary. We've developed their capacity, but also we realized that those who are ready, investment ready, we worked with them for pitches. We've organized actually at the time an online, because it was COVID, online B2B matchmaking, where we connected a lot of those businesses either with investors from the local economy or with VCs who were interested in supporting them. Out of the 16 in Jordan, we got 3 business deals that were attracting and I wouldn't say we got to just clear the language. We helped facilitate those transactions. We provided the ecosystem for that. Poland is one example where I can say today is very attractive to Ukrainian refugees. It's one of the most we have seen so far, to be fair. But still, refugees, especially at the very beginning of the process of becoming a refugee, tend to be more conservative with a mentality of I'm soon going to go back. So this idea of settling in a new country, opening bank accounts, doing the transactions is not as easy. It happens to some businesses where they're entrepreneurs in Ukraine or in Syria who moved their businesses to the host country, and they need those bank accounts, and they're facilitated because of the collaterals they provide. But the smaller we go in scale for the businesses, it becomes more and more difficult. And the same for the startups. So it's either that you build the credibility of those startups and those micro businesses and smaller ones by connecting them to larger businesses, to make them part of the supply chain where they become credible and accredited to businesses, to the financial institutions, or it takes a longer time. So, and I'll give an example on that. There was an Auj Syrian business. It's a mold maker in Jordan. It took them 4 years to be able to register their business. And one of the biggest drivers for them to be able to register a business was that they were able to be matched with plastic manufacturers in Jordan to supply them during COVID, when there was no supply chain possible. And that gave them enough credibility for the authorities and for the financial institutions to show that we're a credible business, we're able to provide good quality products, and we have credible buyers. And from that becomes easier. Other investors, it depends. I'll go back to Jacqueline's point. It depends on the strategy and the vision of the financial institutions. There are a lot of products that have been tested, but I would say we're not there yet. Is it scalable? Yes, it is, but we're not there yet. And PS4R has actually published a paper on investment in refugee businesses, whether that's a myth or a reality. And I'm happy to share the PS4R page. You could find that publication there, but we're not there yet. But is it scalable? Yes. Financial institutions need to find a middle ground where there's mitigation of risk, and there's an understanding of the financial products that could be there that are beneficial for both. They are going to create a huge market for you if you're introducing those financial products. But banks in most countries are not there yet.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. So a couple more quick questions. We have, I'm going to try. My dog wants to participate too. I'll ask you to keep your responses brief, just so that we can get through as many of these questions as possible. So Jackie, very quickly, how much room is available for partnerships with local organizations to grow marketing operations for the refugee products from refugee SMEs?
So I just want to make sure I'm getting this question correctly. How much room is there for
partnerships with local organizations? So I'm assuming this is coming from one of the participants who's involved in a local refugee-led organization to grow marketing operations for refugee products from refugee SMEs. So do you work directly with them on helping them with their marketing? Is that
okay? Yes, good question. And I think that's one of the key roles we play as Sitti with our partners, with our CBO partners, is actually providing them with a more market readiness approach. This was the main sticking point for when we first started working with our partners in Jenna's camp. Was they had a beautiful product. They were making this olive oil soap bar that was absolutely gorgeous. It was, based on passed down traditions. They had hundreds of bars and had no idea how to sell them. And so we really played that pivotal role working with them to develop the packaging, to develop the brand, to really tell that story. And that made all the difference, frankly. And I think that on top of that, there needs to be more welcoming of these refugee-led businesses into the global market. And a lot of times that you need to have that partnership with people from outside the community to help them along and to support them. There really needs to be a partnership. So, we do really vouch for and encourage refugee-led businesses to grow and scale. But I think the other piece to that is seeing, corporate brands or other players from outside those communities coming over to them and saying, let us support you in this endeavor.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. Okay. And last very quick question for Somar. When signing contracts with larger companies, what are the commercial or contractual requirements that the refugee businesses in your network struggle with the most?
Well, actually, very quickly regarding the refugees here in Turkey, actually, most of them have come recently to the country. They are not very well settled and doing their businesses for a long time in Turkey. So the most critical requirement to work with the big brands or big buyers is something about the work safety and the conditions of the workplace, as these entrepreneurs hired or rented the workplaces recently and very quickly, let's say on a hurry to start their businesses quickly. They didn't give a very big attention to the conditions of the workplace, which made it a little bit difficult to work with some large buyers. And we have faced this problem by ourselves when we tried to connect our textile manufacturers with a big international brand, actually.
That's great. Thanks, Somar, for that example. So I think we are at time. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Jackie, Somar, Yara. Thank you for the great conversation. Thank you to Kari and the team at the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative for partnering on this webinar. I hope today that everyone who's joining will take a look at some of the resources. I know Kari has said that some of those will be sent out, so we'll try and make sure that the resources that we've referenced today are included in that message, as well as the recording. So thanks everyone for your active contribution, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.